our ability to run PlayStation 5 game backups on the console. And this is the APR fix or AMPR fix that has been released, or AMPR_EMU. So this is basically an SPRX file that you can swap out when you load a game dump, and it will fix 99% of the games that weren't working previously. So there's a lot of games that we just have not been able to turn into working backups because of this APR issue. When you try to load the game, it just crashes whenever you load it. And therefore, there's lots of games that we just have not been able to turn into working game backups. Now, this is kind of improved over time, but we still have these certain games that just would not be able to load. Whereas now, 99% of those games that weren't working previously should now work with this fix. So, some of the notorious ones are the Insomniac games like these Marvel Spider-Man series and Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. And I do happen to have a disc copy of Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart here on my console, which I've never been able to turn into a working game backup previously, but now I should be able to with this fix. So for instance, I can just download the config file for the PS5 app dumper from EchoStretch's repo, and then I can create a homebrew folder on the root of a USB drive and copy the config file inside. If I open up that config file, I normally enable the elf to fself feature by changing the value from 0 to 1, and that will allow it to automatically fake sign the executables once the game is dumped. So it immediately makes it into a playable game dump, or it should do in most cases. So at that point, we can then simply plug that USB drive into the console. I've got the game running, the disc version of my copy of Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, which is currently running, and then I can load the app dumper, which I'm just loading from the Payload Manager, but you can load that in other ways, like with a payload injector or through Elf Arsenal or some other means. So we simply load that payload and I go back into the game and it starts dumping the game to my USB drive. So it takes a while, but once the dump is complete and it's already dumped all of the files, decrypted the executables and fake signed them, then all we need to do here is simply remove the disk, delete the game. I have Shadow Mount and Kstuff already running, which means as soon as the game is removed, the disk version, it should detect the dumped version on the USB drive that I just created, and it will mount that for us automatically with Shadow Mount Plus. And normally I'd be able to just run the game and it should work. So when I go to launch the game, as you can see, it just unfortunately crashes, not able to load it. And this has been the experience every time I try and make any kind of game backup with these games that have these APR issues. They just crash when you try to load them. So now we should be able to try and fix it here using this new APR fix. So to do that, if I go back onto the computer with the USB drive, I can create a fake lib folder inside the game dump folder, just in the root of the game dump folder. And then inside there, I can copy the .sprx file for the fix, which is the libsceampr.sprx. You also need the patched playgo file as well, which I'll also copy into the fake lib folder. And that's basically it. That should be enough to actually fix this game, because all I need to do is plug that USB drive back into the PS5 and go to launch the game again. Shadow Mount Plus has the backport functionality built into it, so I don't even need to run the backport payload. So when I load the game, you can see it says game backported, but it's not actually backporting the game. It's just swapping out that module for the AMPR fix. And then as you can see, it does go black screen for a long time because I'm running this off a USB drive, so it takes longer to load than it would normally. But once we get into the game, you can see here we get Kstuff paused while game is running instead of Kstuff saying the application crashed. And we actually get into the main menu and the game is now running. That's why you're seeing so many more PlayStation 5 game backups that are appearing now that previously could not be turned into working backups before, but now they can. 99% of the games that weren't working are now working thanks to this fix. So that's a huge improvement right there for creating and running your PlayStation 5 game backups, which is great. So there are still a few games that are not working. Obviously, some games require other manual tweaks to other parts of the game to get it working, because there might be other issues besides the APR issue to get those games working. There's also a new build of Kstuff version 1.07 that now adds the ability to view the trophy menu, so you can actually properly view your trophies with Kstuff. And it has now been fully released with trophy support and PFS compression support for smaller game dumps, which we covered in the last update video. This also goes along with a new update to the dump installer, which also has support for installing compressed game dumps with trophy info displayed on the home screen. And for some of the other updates, we also got the release of a new system software update for the PS5, bringing the firmware version up to 13.40 from the previous 13.20 version. And it just says that they've improved system software performance and stability. Does not seem to mention if they've patched anything in this update, so we don't really know. although it would be likely if they patched the 0-day kernel exploit, the new kernel exploit that Gedgine has in private. If that was patched, it would most likely be an update that would come out for PS4 and PS5 to patch them simultaneously, but in this case, this is just a standalone update for the PS5. There was not a parallel update for the PS4. Also, there's a new version of the YouTube Jailbreak, version 1.6 beta, and this version is specifically supporting the latest firmwares up to 13.40. Now, this has caused a little bit of confusion because it was thought that the YouTube Jailbreak was patched in 12.40, and this is just some kind of miscommunication really, because it was never really patched in 12.40. The actual userland exploit itself for YouTube Jailbreak was not patched in 12.40. The reason why we say it's patched after 12.40 is simply the fact that the application, the YouTube app itself, was loadable without a license up to 12.40, and then once you got past 12.40, PlayStation changed it so that you now need to buy a license or purchase a license from the PlayStation Store. Even though it's a free application, you purchase a free license from the PlayStation Store to be able to then run the application, and that prevents people on older firmwares who can't access the PlayStation Store from being able to actually load the application. And that's why we essentially say it's patched after 12.40, when if you do have a license on a higher firmware than 12.40 to run the application, then the userland exploit is not patched. It just wasn't supported up to the latest firmwares on the latest versions of the YouTube application, but that has now changed. Gedgine has added support up to the latest versions of the YouTube application. So if you're on a console that's on the latest firmware that has access to PSN, you can download the YouTube application from the store, so you have the license to run it, and you can effectively get the YouTube application loaded on that firmware with the YouTube Jailbreak. But again, that is just a userland exploit, not a kernel exploit, because we don't have a public kernel exploit that works up to 13.40 yet. So if you're on the latest firmware, you can run the userland portion of the jailbreak, but you can't actually jailbreak your console on the latest firmware. So that's why this doesn't really change anything right now. You can still only use the YouTube jailbreak to jailbreak up to 12.40, because 12.60 and 12.70, you're not going to have a license for the YouTube application. And on the latest firmware, we don't have a kernel exploit to be able to actually jailbreak with it. So that's why this doesn't really change anything right now, but it could be useful for any future jailbreaks that come out later on. If you're using a previous version of the YouTube jailbreak and you just want to update to the new 1.6 beta, you can simply just download the file from the repo and install it manually by enabling FTP on your console and then going into the user folder, the download folder, the PPSA 01650 folder, and simply replace the download0.dat file that's already in there with the one for the 1.6 version, and that will get it updated to that version. But bear in mind, this beta does not include an autoloader, so if you're using an autoloader, I wouldn't recommend switching over to this until the autoloaders get support for the new version. That's if there is any other additional features added in this besides support for higher firmwares, because if there isn't, then there isn't really any reason to update to this version at the moment. So speaking of the YouTube jailbreak, we do also have an update to the autoloader. Now this is a pre-release test build, so not recommended yet, but this is the PLK autoloader. Now we already have a different autoloader we can use for YouTube jailbreak right now, but this one does have some more quality of life features, like the nice UI with the progress bar when you go to load the jailbreak. Not only that, but you also have the updater where you can update from a zip file that's stored on the root of a USB drive. When you run the YouTube application with a previous version, it will automatically update to the latest version, which is handy. So that's something that this version has. This build forces Y2JB on all firmwares, which is why it's not recommended at the moment, because of course it'll be better to wait for when it has support for the lapse exploit up to 10.01 and then uses P2JB for any higher firmwares than that, which would make sense. So that'll probably be added once we get a full release of this. We've also had an update to the Payload Manager, which adds a number of new features. There's a pre-release build of 0.3.1, but 0.3.0 added a number of new features like the multi-source payload repositories, which basically means that you can add additional repos for the cloud repository for other payloads, so that you can download other payloads directly with the Payload Manager. It does need to be a JSON file that has all of the repositories added, so you can add a link to one of those JSON repositories that has a bunch of payloads listed, and you'll get more payloads that you're able to download within the application. There's been a lot of other improvements, but we also have a process management that's been added in there as well, so you can actually see the ELF files that are running on your console, and you can also kill any that you no longer want running. Finally, the Blu-ray unpatching payload was updated to support the latest PS5 firmware 13.40, So if you did happen to have a jailbreak on the latest firmware, nothing public at the moment, but there are developers like Gedgina who has a private one that they can now unpatch the Blu-ray jailbreak on. And that'll be useful, of course, for when we hopefully get a jailbreak up to that firmware in the future. But yeah, anyway, that's basically it for this one. So hope you guys enjoyed this video or found the information useful. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. And as always, I will hopefully see you guys in the next.